Well, welcome to the Goat Shed for another informative instructional video. Today we're going to talk about the Gottlieb replay unit. Now, in the past we've done quite a few videos on step units, and I just suddenly realised after reading a few posts in some of the groups that I really haven't done one on a replay unit, and we perhaps should. Even though essentially a replay unit is very similar to a bonus unit, it's actually an advancing and subtracting stepper. In other words, it increments one by one and subtracts one by one. At the moment you can see 0 in the replay window. But before we go on, once again I'd like to remind you to subscribe to our channel, give our video the big thumbs up, and in the comment section feel free to ask any questions and we'll try and answer them. Another good way to learn more about the games is to join our group on Facebook. It's called The Goat Shed EM Pinball Repair Specialists. Now, let's talk a little bit about this replay unit. Now, once again, this unit has already been removed out of a machine, and you can see all cut wires there. I emphasise you do not cut the wires. To get the replay unit out, you unsolder the wires off the top coil, which is a little bit, there it is. Those two wires come off, and then you get the 2 wires off the other coil, and you undo the screws on the switch stacks. There's a couple there. This one's got 3 switch stacks on it. This is off a very later game, I think. Possibly this is off a Centigrade 37, I'm not sure. So, obviously, I emphasise do not cut the wires. So, this replay unit is typical of a Gottlieb replay unit. It's seized up, it's 40 odd years old, it needs totally dismantling and cleaning. Now, it should be noted that if we hold this unit like so and we try and push in the reset arm, it won't go in. That's because this pivot point here is totally seized up, and that's because it has dried up grease in there, and this little thing here, this is the subtract pull, that'll stay up in the air, and if you had 10 credits and it did pull in, if the subtract pull stuck up in the air, all your credits go down to 0. Okay, we have this is a screw. It's adjustable for the amount of credits you get. You can set it between 5, 10 and 15, I think it is from memory, by changing the position of the screw from here to here to here. So we're going to pull this apart and clean it up, and once again I'm going to remind you about a couple of things. There's a nut on the back of this screw. Do not try and undo the screw without undoing or loosening the nut first. And more often than not, particularly on games in the 70s, those nuts are very tight on there, and you need to put some penetrating oil on there to loosen them up, or WD-40, whatever you prefer. Occasionally you have to leave them overnight, otherwise you'll break it. Now, you can get new shoulder screws if you do break them. There's 2 styles. This one is a longer one because it has a subtract pull on it, or there's a shorter one, and they're available from PBR, the Pinball Resource. Okay, I'm going to disassemble this now, and we'll get back to it in a few moments. Just before we do that, a lot of you people don't know what tools they need to do this. Now, essentially you need about 6 or 7 tools to work on a replay unit, plus a soldering iron or gun. Now, it's important to note that some of the tools are fairly standard. So we have an 11/32 nut driver, which is the green one, a 5/16 nut driver, which is the yellow one, a number 6 and a number 8 standard blade screwdriver. I like to use a spring hook, and you have a 1/8 Allen key and a 9/64 Allen key. So they're the important tools you need to work on these units. So first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the coil casing. There's 2 screws on the back of that coil casing. Just undo them and that coil casing will come out and we can pull that apart. I'm going to take this is known as the drive arm, this arm here. I'm going to take that drive arm off by removing this screw, but once again there's a nylock nut on the back of that. That's where you need the 11/32 driver for that. The nut on the back of this screw is a 5/16 inch one. I'm going to remove the springs and we'll take the escapement wheel out. We'll remove the reset coil simply by taking the circlip off the fibre link there. We can take that out and then we can clean the unit. So we'll be down to the frame and give it a good clean. So this is where we use the 1/8 Allen key to undo these Allen screws here. And when you've undone, there's 2 of them, when you've undone them both, sometimes these are a little difficult to get off. So what you do, you use a twisting action like that, like you're unscrewing it, screwing it, unscrewing it, screwing it, and then it should easily come off. The reason they don't come off is they get burrs here, and you can just see a little burr there. We normally run a little file over that just to take the edge off them. This is the screw that you need to undo on the other side of the shoulder. Now what I'm going to do with that, I'm going to sit this up straight in a moment, sort of like this, as best I can. And I'm going to drop some penetrating oil on that. These are the 2 screws. In this case, I'll undo to take the coil housing off. Now, if you're not sure where they go, you can mark them, but it is an adjustment, and we'll talk about that a little later. And these screws have got nuts on the back that need to come off. Oh, that's right, they're 1/4 inch nuts, so you need a 1/4 inch spin tight as well. That's the C-clip we'll take off for here. One other thing that's important is that if you're not sure what you're doing, naturally you take photos, but always remember, a lot of steppers, the lugs, in this case on the replay unit, point upwards. Often on bonus steppers, you move it sideways and they point out this way. The other thing I also mentioned, I said that you needed a 1/4 inch for that. No, that's not right. It's a 5/16, so you don't need a 1/4 inch tool. So just take a lot of photos if you're not sure. Now this shoulder screw was really jam tight. I had to do a lot of fiddling around to get that out. So what I did, you don't have to do this very often, but I did in this case because there'll be all white grease on the shoulder. I'm going to pull that out and show you. But what I had to do, I had to grab this pawl. It was really tight and I had to vigorously move it up and down like that to get it to work. It's a lot freer. Now that was just jam tight. Now this will happily come out like so, and let's have a look. The nut's already off the back, remember. Goes a bit tight. It's not the thread that's tight, it's the actual shoulder screw. Okay, it tightens up again a little bit there. That's pretty normal. Out she comes, and let's have a look. Yep, there's all grease and everything in there. See all the grease? Look at it. That's what seized it up. So that has to go in and be cleaned, and there's all gump in the middle of the hole there. Right, now the subtract arm will come off, and there'll be gunk in the middle of that too. You probably can't see that. So people that just spray something in there, yes, you will get it to work for a little while, no doubt about it, but it is only a band-aid effect. The only way to effectively repair these is to pull them right down as we're doing now. Do it once, do it right. Now we have the drive arm out. This is actually the drive pawl. This one's not too bad, but it should move freely. It's biting. There's all gump under there. So the cleaner will fix that up. It's just dirt and dried up oil got in there over the years. And this is a part we do lubricate when we put it back together on the pivot point with light machine oil, or as some people use, 3-in-1. Now the other thing that we've got to be aware of is we need to take the torsion spring out. Now this is a much debated thing. I'm not sure why, but it is. People get very worried about this, say, oh, it's wound to so many turns from the factory. It's a torsion spring. It is like a clock spring. It is designed to be wound and unwound all the time, and as it does that, it loses tension. Now you can buy spring kits from Pinball Resource for these units, which get a new torsion spring. This one's a bit rusty. I'm not going to bother cleaning it up for this demonstration, but I could put that in some vinegar, I should say, and clean that up and get a bit of WD-40 on it then and give it a bit of a hand polish, and it'll look very nice. So the other point I want to make here is that there's the where you see the screw, the shoulder screw come out. You can see all the grease. See all that? I'm getting it off now, and so on, where it's been rubbing unlubricated for years. So this is why it's important. It really, really is important. I harp on about it, but believe me, you do it and you won't have to touch it again, ever again. So all we're going to do now is get a pair of pliers. I've bent that torsion spring out of the way, like that loop at the bottom with a like a jeweler's screwdriver, and now all I need to do is I can push it around like that. I can lift it, and out it comes. Now be warned, just rest it there. When you take the escapement wheel out, that just slides straight out. Always unwind the torsion spring. Just be very careful. When you put these back together, it's generally 3 to 4 turns. That's what it's all about. So now we've pretty well disassembled the whole unit, except we've just got to take this one nut off here, which we'll do now. Out it falls, and then we've got the other coil, and we can replace the sleeve. We'd obviously replace the sleeve if we're doing the right job on that. Now the other thing we do, we have a magnetic parts tray that we like to put our parts in so we don't lose them. Here it is here. You can buy these at auto stores and things like that, I believe. In Australia, you can get them at Repco for any Australian viewers. Not sure about other countries. Now we're going to put this in the ultrasonic cleaner and do its work. And for those that have watched our videos over a period of time, you know that I'm very partial to using kerosene. So all the small parts will go in the ultrasonic cleaner in a container with kerosene in it, and the bigger parts will go in the ultrasonic cleaner, which has simply Dawn dishwashing liquid and water in it. I preheat the ultrasonic cleaner for this particular job to about 52 degrees, and I run it then for about 30 minutes. Sometimes a little bit longer if anything's particularly dirty, and it'll come up nice, and then we'll clean everything up. While the parts are off in the cleaner, I just like to do a few things. I generally check the coils to make sure they're okay, not open circuit or burnt out, and I simply get my meter and set it on ohms. And if you're not sure what ohms are, that's that funny little omega symbol there. So these are A5194 Gottlieb coils. They're fairly common in steppers and various parts of the pinball machine. These generally measure around 5 ohms, between 4.6 to 5 ohms roughly. Essentially, let's just clip this on here. And we'll see, there we go. What have we got? Well, that one's about 5 ohms thereabouts. Okay, that's good. Then what we'll do is we'll take that one away, and we'll get this one out and clip the leads on it. Haven't got that on right. Put it on there like that. Still not on right. There. Oh, I should have. Oh, there's my problem. Just get that out of the road. And this one should measure around the same. 4.9. Yeah, we're happy with that. So you check that. I've already gone away and I've cleaned up the... you saw that was filthy before. Just a bit of spit and polish. That's all I used. You can use Novus on those, Novus 2 if you want. You generally won't rub the numbers off, but just be careful. So you clean that up. And the other thing you can do if you want, okay, once again a much debated subject. Here we have the switches that are out of the unit, and obviously I've got them in my hand, and I emphasise you don't cut them out of the game. You can either get a points file and clean those up, or you can get a Dremel with a 443 carbon brush on the end and clean them. So if I was to do that, let's do this one here. Oh, trying to do this all one-handed. Start up the Dremel. I'll do this one, it'll be easier. I'm not sure if you can see, but see the shiny bit there? It's cleaned that up nicely. I'll go underneath there, clean that bit up. Now the only downside of doing it this way, you do a nice job, but you've got to watch your switch presses when you put it all back together. Okay, that's pretty important. So that's obviously a normally, could be a normally closed switch. You've just got to adjust your pressures. Right, so we've completed the cleaning of all the parts in the ultrasonic cleaner. Now, the frame in this case, I could have given it polished it up a bit better, but this is just a second-hand part, so I'm not going to bother about that. But clearly what you can see here, this little tip here, that's the 0 stop position for the escapement wheel, and that screw there is the adjustment for it. It rocks back or forward. You don't have to adjust it very often, but we'll show you shortly what occurs there. This is the drive arm up stop. It lifts up and down. Now, you've got to remember, when we put the coil case back on, over the years, the plunger wears down and the coil stop itself wears down. So that increases the drive of that particular plunger and the upward position, and alters the way or the position where this stop brake, where this stop rests, the drive arm. This is the drive arm, this bit here. So it rests against there. Now, they break very often, these things. There's two old ones, and you can see they virtually break in the same spot. Now, they wouldn't break if they were adjusted, you know, every 5 years or the adjustment check, but of course, we all know that doesn't happen. But they are available from PBR, and the part number for that is A256, A256, if you need to buy any. Okay, so what we're going to do now, we're going to start reassembly of the replay unit, and we'll show you bit by bit what we're going to do. Now, I normally pop the coil or the drive arm on first, and I've already cleaned up the drive arm pivot screw, and I also cleaned up the screw. Remember, that had all grease on it? It's all perfectly clean now. I've run the Dremel over the shaft of the collar on both of those off camera, just with a 443 tool, and that was the one on the reset arm. Now, this is actually the reset arm here. This arm, they call that the reset arm. I may have worded that differently earlier on in the video, but it's actually the reset arm. And the reset arm in this case has this part on it, which is the subtract pull. So the idea is the pull falls in and checks the teeth of the escapement wheel as it moves around. Remember we said earlier, if that sticks up in the air and you had 10 credits, that wheel will just spin right back to 0 position. I've got that round the wrong way at the moment, but 0 position. But while we've got that there, let's also talk about this. Where are we? That's the 0 stop. That there. That's the thing that rests against there. So when you put that in, it stops. It can't go any further. And you can see the back of it there, right there. Can you see that? There it is there. Get that out of the road. That's the back of it. So that can't go any further. It's pretty straightforward. Let's put the drive arm on. Now we have the drive arm back on, and you can see that that moves quite freely up and down. That's the drive pull, and it's important to put a drop of oil on that drive pull. Just light machine oil. So I just get a little drop. I've got a little thin spout on this. Just get a drop of oil on it. There you go. That's enough. That's as free as a bird now. So by cleaning that, it eliminates having to cut springs and all that sort of stuff. Now, while we've got the thing apart like this, one thing that I like to do is actually make sure that we check all the screws are tight. Now, I've said this in videos before. You can generally tell when someone's fiddled around with one of these because the screw heads get all chopped up. Now, the reason that happens is because someone's used the wrong size screwdriver. Essentially, this screw here is a number 8. So use a number 8. There it is there. It's a Stanley 8 by 200. Don't use a number 6, which is this, because it moves around in the head. See that? It's moving around in the head, where the number 8 won't do that. It's very important you use the right tools. That's the way I was taught when I was an apprentice typewriter mechanic, and you've got to kick up the arse off the tradesman if they saw you using the wrong screwdriver. We can't do that to you because we're too far away, but yeah, please consider that when you're repairing your pinball machines. Very important. Okay, what we'll do now, we'll put the coil casing on and we'll fit the switches back on. So let's do that. So now we've fitted the drive arm and the coil casing back on. Now the next thing to do, I'll put the reset arm on, and then we'll sit the escapement wheel in and do the spring tension for it, because we've got to have everything back together before we check our adjustments. Now the thing to remember here is when you put the reset arm back on, you've got to have this lever over, and you've got to make sure that the drive pull is out of the road. See that there? That's a bit of fish paper on that switch. If this was a customer's repair, we'd replace that because it's sort of been damaged. That's just to insulate the pull from the metal. So you do that. So yeah, the drive pull sits on that little bit there. Don't have it the wrong way. Sticks out. Now all that remains, and that sits like that. The idea of that is the reset arm pulls the pull out so that the wheel can go in the reverse direction, the escapement wheel. Now we've got to put the nut on the back of that, so we'll do that, and then we'll carry on and show you the adjustments. So when you put that reset arm back on, just make sure that the arm moves freely. What I generally do, I tighten it up till it's a bit tight, and then I just back it off a bit. And I also put a drop of oil on the shoulder screw, because remember that's through the subtract pull and the arm itself. You tend to get used to them. It's not hard to do. They have a little bit of movement, sideways movement, and that's okay. All right, so that's the best way to do it. There's the nut on the back. Once again in question, this nut here. And that's a 832 nut, just in case you need them. And remember, you can buy the shoulder screws from PBR. There's 2 sizes. There's a longer one, because this one has the longer one, because it's got the subtract pull on, and there's a shorter one where there's no subtract pull, just goes through the reset arm. So just bear that in mind. Now, when you put the escapement wheel in, remember to have the zero stop resting against the zero stop arm. And what I do to ensure that they don't move, I just put that bearing back on, and I just lightly tighten it up so that it won't move. So let's just do that. And remember earlier on we we told you about filing the shaft on the escapement wheel where it gets a bit tight. So that's got a little bit of sideways movement in now. That's what I was doing, just getting that sideways movement there. And away we go. Now, once again, rest that against the shaft. You might need to pull the pawl out of the road. And what we're going to do, we're going to wind this. Now, remember I said earlier, a lot of people get all worried about this. It's not a big deal. All you've got to do is wind it round. That's 1 turn, 2 turns, 3 turns. Now, I can feel them, but I'm just going to go a 4th turn on that. And it should be fine. You can rest it there if you like. That's nice and snappy. So I'm fairly happy with that. What I'll do now, I'll just lift that up and I'll put it in the hole there where we took it from. Remember, we used a jeweler's screwdriver to pry that over, make some room, and now we'll put it back in. So that's fairly simple to do as well. Now, the first adjustment you check is the rest position for the the reset arm at 0. So let's just get this back to 0. Right, we're at 0 now. Now what must happen, the reset arm must fall into that tooth like that cleanly. If it doesn't, that's where you have to adjust the reset arm itself by that screw. You don't have to do this too often, but if that's wrong, you can have problems. Now, the next adjustment to check is once you've stepped away from the reset arm, doesn't matter how many, you can do that. You also check that the reset arm still falls in cleanly, which it is. If it does not, that's where you have to adjust this arm here with the 2 screws in it, because the tail of that rests on there. See? It's resting there. Once again, you don't have to adjust that too often. But the most critical adjustment that you generally have to make is that you only want, let's get this here so you can see it. You only want the drive to go half a tooth. Now I'm coming down. Really that drive should end there, but it's going a little bit further. Should end about there. Can you see that? Half a tooth you want. Oh dear. Half a tooth. It's going a bit more than half a tooth. So the way to adjust that is to hold it up in the air like that, turn it over and adjust, move the screws, move the coil case up or down. Now in this case I've got to bring the coil case down to restrict the travel, and then I may have to adjust the drive arm up stop. So I'm just going to have to use a couple of hands here, so I'll turn that over. I've got those finger tight at the moment, those screws there. Let's just move that down a bit, just a little bit. Whoops. See, I'm edging that down bit by bit. I'm just going to come just a little bit more. I'm going to tighten that up. Oh, sorry, you couldn't see that. I'm just going to tighten that up, finger tight, and I'll recheck how I'm going. Let's see. Yeah, that's better. It's only going half a tooth now. I know it's hard to see in there. Half a tooth. And that's what you want. Right, now I'm going to tighten the 2 screws up on the back of the coil casing, being certain to keep the casing perpendicular not crooked. So let's just do that. So the next adjustment we have to make, and I can see that this is out because it's too far. The screws are in the, well, they're indicating to me that they're not quite right. So what you do, you hold this up, and you've got to be able to put a sheet of paper in there. There's a hell of a gap in there. So all I need to do is loosen these two screws and then just tap that down, holding the drive arm up against the coil stop and bringing that down till I can just drag my sheet of paper out with just a fraction of drag. I think everyone might understand that. Alright, so we'll just do that. Righto, so that's perfect now. So I put my sheet of paper in. Whoops, I'll have to move my hand, won't I? Pull it up, and I can just drag that out with a little bit, feeling a little bit of drag between the drive arm up stop and the drive arm itself. So now we have a perfectly functioning replay unit. All that remains to do now is to put the wheel on. So you obviously make sure it's at 0, step it down till you can't go any further. Now remember, those switches aren't on here because they're normally soldered on inside the game. And all we'll do now is we'll take this back off and just fix it up from there. So it's just a matter of loosening the screw that I put in there earlier. Now the idea of this is to get it, you can generally look at the old, haven't got that undone enough. You can generally look at the old screw holes and line it up. So I'm at 0, let's have a look, there's one there. So let's just put that on, and there's another one on the top, mark. So we'll pop it on like that, just there. Just finger tighten it. Right, like that. Just try and get a bit of sideways play in there if you can. So you've got to fiddle around with that sometimes, just a little bit. Just a bit of sideways movement there now. Then you can tighten them both up. I recently bought these Sid Chrome Allen keys on the long shaft with a handle. You've got the bit there on the end as well, which are really good. Okay, so now what we've got to do, I'll pop the wheel on and set it at 0, and that's what you want to see. Right, you want to see that's at 0 now. You want to see that you've got it in roughly in about the middle. You don't want it there because there's no room for adjustment. You don't want it there. You want it about there. So let's just go ahead and do that. So there it is. It steps up nicely. It decrements nicely all the way down to 0. We've got the roughly in the middle. That's achieved by adjusting these screws, as we just said. As you can see, we've got it adjusted reasonably well. Could have been a little bit more centre. In other words, I could have moved the spider a bit more, but that's a good replay unit. So thanks so much for watching one of our videos, and once again we hope you've found this informative. It's a rather long video, but if you take the time, well, you did take the time to get to this point, thank you very much. Feel free to post any comments below. And Spanky has a visitor today. This is Spanky's cousin Cecil from Cessnock. So this has been another Goat Shed presentation.